On October 16th, 1985, Possessed had released their debut album, Seven Churches. This album is considered a pioneering record in death metal. The rawness and intensity of black metal was being fused with the speed and aggression of thrash metal, something that hadn't really been done before. While acts like Celtic Frost and Slayer had begun to do this, Possessed was taking this to a new level. Joe DeVita of Loudwire said in a 2024 article, "It's impossible to have the conversation about the genre's death metal's birth without at least mentioning the snarling Seven Churches and its sinister melodies cut with pounding rhythmic intent. It is this rhythmic intent that would form the bones of what death metal would become." In this video, I'll be covering the early years of famous death metal band Death. Um, this will include some of their early history, their demos, the recording of their albums Scream, Bloody Gore, Leprosy, and Spiritual Healing, along with analysis of the lyrics and artwork for each of those records. So if that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned. The year prior to Seven Churches' release, Mantis, a speed thrash death metal band formed in Florida, released a demo entitled Death by Metal before dissolving later the same year. Their music was fast, loud, heavy, and full of youthful rage. What Mantis was is not as notable as who it was. The founder and lead songwriter was a young Chuck Schuldiner, who, by 1985, had renamed his band. Mantis was no more, and Death was born. According to Encyclopedia Metalum, Death released 23 demos between Death by Metal in 1984 and their debut full length in 1987. 23 demos in less than 3 years is an impressive feat for really any band. Through these demos, Death began gaining notoriety in the Florida underground tape trading scene. What made these demos so special was how intense they were. Death was taking the snarls, blast beats, and riffing of Seven Churches and really taking it to the extreme. This extremity was the meat on the bones of what Possessed had started. However, the recording of these demos was no light task. Creating these demos saw Chuck Schuldiner traveling a fair amount, attempting to find new bandmates. During this time, Chuck had traveled from Florida up to San Francisco. The reason for this change, according to Chuck, "I tried looking for new members here in Florida, but it was near impossible to find anyone who was into playing brutal death metal." Chuck stated this in a 1987 interview. While in San Francisco, Chuck began working with former DRI, a hardcore thrash crossover band, their drummer, Eric Bretsch. However, this partnership fell through. Chuck's journey then brought him to Canada. Uh, Chuck had been offered to play guitar for the death thrash band Slaughter. However, this deal once more fell through. With nowhere left to go, Chuck returned to San Francisco where he found drummer Chris Reinert, who would go on to play on a 3-track demo entitled Mutilation. As Death became more serious in their craft, they found it necessary to find a label to officially publish their music. Trading demos could only get them so far. The Mutilation demo had impressed the folks at Combat Records. Death was then signed to the label. Death, which at the time was a 2-man project consisting of Chuck Schuldiner and Chris Reinert, began working on their first ever full-length. This album was a complete and total failure. It was written off as a mistake by Combat. According to Reinert, the engineers just looked at us blankly, like they didn't know anything about metal. Combat sent Chuck and Chris to Los Angeles to re-record the album. This session became what we know today as Scream Bloody Gore. This re-recording saw Chuck Schuldiner on everything but drums, so guitar, bass, and vocals, with Chris only providing drums. The lack of a bassist doesn't hold back this album's incredible groove. Chuck unleashes a heavy, pounding foundation for his guitar work to go over. Every instrument is tightly woven together and feels refined, while still maintaining the raw power of their early demo work. All of the aggression of Death by Metal is focused into catchy riffs, hard-hitting blast beats, and screeching growls, which sound less human and more animalistic. The gnarly and gruesome aspects of this record don't end with the sounds present. The lyrics here are grotesque and vile, more so than really any album before it. Scream Bloody Gore lacks the doom and dread of more traditional heavy metal or the political aggression of thrash metal, but more than makes up for it with sheer carnage. There are songs about tearing people to pieces, necrotic rituals, and evil returning from the dead. From the very beginning, it's made clear that this will be a violent and disturbing affair. Track 1, Infernal Death, begins with the expert cruelty with the lyrics, "Piling the bodies, burn them in the night, skin grows black and withered, decay smell will rise." While compared to some of Death's contemporaries, like the infamous Cannibal Corpse or the brutal Suffocation, these lyrics may seem tame. However, something like this really hadn't been heard before. They were some of the first lyrics to bring in the violence and brutality of horror films into music. However, this is not to say that Scream Bloody Gore is constant, unending brutality. There are slower, more evil, for lack of a better term, sounding moments. These moments bring in minor thirds, power chords, and low fretting. Slower points on this record are in no way pretty or even calm for that matter. During these sections, lyrics become more prominent. One example is on the track Sacrificial. The opening is slow, almost grudging, while maintaining an ominous guitar sound. Lyrics include, "With chainsaw in hand, your death I demand," which then breaks into the faster pre-chorus of the song. Chuck utilized unique structures for the death metal genre. Songs aren't quite as structured as the typical verse, chorus, verse style of pop music, but more structured than the nearly completely random aggression of brutal death metal bands like Cryptopsy. Despite the heaviness of this record, Chuck had a keen sense of melody. This sense of melody was really unlike his peers in the death metal genre. The melodic sensibilities can be heard on tracks like Torn to Pieces, Mutilation, and the title track, Scream Bloody Gore. These tracks' melodies, in particular, are notable due to their excessive reputation. Mutilation, 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 Chuck screams in the chorus of the aptly titled song of the same name. Scream Bloody Gore was released on May 25th, 1987. The original release included 10 tracks, however, pressings after 2016 included 2 new tracks, Beyond the Unholy Grave and Land of No Return. The record didn't gain much mainstream attention, however, it quickly became one of the most influential bands within death metal scenes globally. Stephen Gabetti of Artshock magazine said in a 1987 review, "Every thrasher respecting him/herself should buy this record," before giving the album a 10 out of 10. The album art is very notable, as it was an album that would influence pretty much all future death metal album art. It features a cult of skeletons drinking from goblets, hailing a purple-clad skeleton sat in a throne surrounded by bone. It may lack some of the more gruesome aspects of future death metal album art, but it did introduce the horror that was really what made the genre so famous. As time would go on, death would gain more appeal, technicality, and just general popularity. Future projects went far smoother for the band than on Scream Bloody Gore. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I know I don't make a ton of long-form content. The next episode will be on Leprosy, one of my favorite albums of all time, easily my favorite death metal album of all time. So it's just a brief rundown of Scream Bloody Gore. Yeah, so I will see you later. Stay brutal, and keep rocking in the free world.